Hey everyone, and welcome to Async, the book club for busy people. My name is Steve.
And my name is Marina, and we are your hosts.
Not only does this increase your chance of scoring dates on Tinder, but it also makes you part of a community of like-minded folk who are curious and want to share ideas together.
Really?
And now we would like to introduce our esteemed guest, Bob Pladek, the author of Eyes Open. Welcome, Bob, to Async, and tell us a little bit about yourself and why you wrote this book.
Well, thank you guys for having me and giving me this opportunity to try to remember why the hell I wrote it, when the hell I wrote it, and what it was about. I actually had to go back and read most of it over the last few days. It's shocking. I don't know whether or not it's age or just simply because I've moved on to something else that I've been writing, which is already twice as long as what this one was. I was variously amused and discouraged, by reading back through this book as to what it was I was attempting to accomplish and how I went about it, accomplishing whatever I thought it was. As for me, I practiced law for 17 years. Then I was involved in publishing with a couple of little weekly legal newspapers and ended up in another quasi-legal service career, running process service companies and a legal courier. And in between there, I ran a chemical engineering business, which my father had started. And when he passed away and my mom ran for a while, did that for about 5 or 6 years. So it's been a fairly, diverse careers. But during all of this, I was doing things like writing, I was a humor columnist for an adult magazine for about a 2.5-year period, doing a monthly adult humor column. Primarily, it was towards an older audience, sort of 40 to 50-year-olds, that kind of a thing. But it was an actual publication back when people did this with paper, hold it with one hand and do whatever with the other. And I published a whole bunch of various business articles. Again, primarily humor oriented, hopefully with a little bit of a point. The idea of writing a novel, this one was my third attempt at writing, my first attempt at publishing. The other two I would just consider experimental.
So you have two that you never published.
Yeah, although I have to admit, I kind of rated the second one for a couple of scenes, a couple of bits that I did that did end up into Eyes Open. But you talk about going back and reading something that you wrote a significant period of time before, and I'm glad I neither attempted to convince some publisher to do it, nor took the idiotic step of attempting to self-publish it. They were really pretty damn awful as it came out. But writing definitely helps you write.
For sure.
For sure. Enough with the small talk. Our book clubbers are busy people.
Yeah.
No more of this. Let's start clubbing with a brief synopsis straight from the horse's mouth.
Okay.
Bob, what is Eyes Open about? Who are the main characters? And how are you inspired to create them? Bob, the stand-up floor is yours.
Yes. Okay. So you have a character who's in his early 60s, and he's doing he's put in an interesting position of being able to do nothing more in any kind of physical way. So all he's left with are his memories. And those memories range from great things that he remembers about his life to the regrets he's had in his life. And primarily trying to figure out how he got to where he is. I mean, there's a specific incidents that lead him to that particular point of immobility in a hospital bed with nothing to look forward to. So really, you are left with just memories. And frankly, when I began writing it, it was kind of the idea that, okay, am I ever going to write a book? Or I did those other two. Is there any story to tell? My cousins and I have talked for years about, gee, we really should get our moms, and mine is still God bless her, alive at 95 years old. People that lived through the Depression, lived through World War II, blah, blah, blah. All of these old great kind of memories that we've never actually audio recorded and captured. And in a way, some of those kind of look backs here were a way of capturing, in a somewhat exaggerated way for sure, things that actually had gone on in my life. But anyway, 2/3 of this book kind of ended up with that. What's a regret? What's not a regret? What do we remember? And can you design the character around what the character believes is important to him? What is it that he is? Well, he is a combination. He's a collection of all of those prior experiences. And that's how you kind of define who this person is. And he isn't the most attractive of characters. You know, he's no saint for sure. And it occurred to me that that was getting pretty effing boring about 2/3 of the way through. And I thought, all right, you got him in a hospital bed. Why not have some kind of personal redemption? Does he have any purpose left in life? And so the idea of saying, okay, there's an angel of death wandering around the hospital. Can he somehow, and he would be the prime kind of target for that. Is there a way for him to communicate that he knows who it is? And that's really kind of what drives the last third of the book. And with that, I ended up having to say, okay, I better tease this a couple more times. So I teased it back into maybe only about halfway through before that even came up. But I'd love to say that it was entirely outlined in the very beginning. It just did not come together that way.
That's very interesting. Something that we wanted to ask you about actually is the process of when you decided to enter the Angel of Death. But let's get through we have a long list of questions. So let's get those fish frying and let the clubbing of Bob begin. So here are the questions.
So before we get to our questions, I actually wanted to ask you questions from our book clubbers. So we have several book clubbers. We're pretty big and famous, you know, like Beyonce big. So the first question is, what inspired the monologue / steady stream of consciousness style of writing? And was it difficult to keep the overarching message intact while being tangential at the same time? I'm not sure what that question means, but I think you do.
Yeah, in a way. What inspired it was the fact you can't talk. So it's going to have to be stream of conscious. I mean, you have kind of two options here. Somebody looking at the dude, somebody else looking at this guy and trying to remember about him, or him sitting there laying there trying to remember himself. So the stream of consciousness stuff came out of, he's got nothing else to do. He's looking up at a ceiling or looking at a door or looking at a window, and all his mind can really do is just think about what has already occurred to him. And so it's kind of a cheap literary device, really, to essentially say you can jump around from topic to topic, or from small inspiration to, no, this reminds me of this, or this reminds me of this. But in a way, it's kind of like a very long daydream, going from one thing to another thing to another thing. And he's, alternately amused and bemused by things that are happening once he becomes known as, we'll just use the term, as the vegetable in the hospital. So the idea of people coming in and using it as a bit of a brothel and that, they just occurred to me like, yeah, that kind of stuff probably happens. Do I know if that actually happened? No, I do not. And his observations are all through this very, very fuzzy, non-glass wearing kind of idea. So it really becomes impressions, and it becomes, body posturing, that kind of thing, but primarily audio, which is triggering all of this. I hope that's responsive, sort of.
That makes sense. And, as the book goes on, his almost like lucidness disappears, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I like that aspect. That was nice. Marina, any follow-up?
Yeah, so actually on that point, this is pretty much related, is where did you get the idea to do it from the perspective of someone who's comatose? Did you see anyone who had that experience, or where did that come up?
Yeah, gosh, I wish I could say that. This is sort of a Proust in bed kind of a thing, where he wrote, whatever, 200 million friggin' words of all of his stuff were while he was lying in bed. But it probably came out of my own experience of having had a seizure and of having had not a stroke, but of having been in an accident. So this book actually, I think, started after 2016 as some germ of an idea after I, like the character, got T-boned at an intersection and ended up in an emergency, in an ambulance going to the hospital. And so those things kind of led me to, I guess this could have gone a lot worse than it did. And then you just sort of take it from there. It's like, all right, you've had a seizure, never had a stroke, but what happens if you had ended up back in the hospital? And I've had 2 experiences with people that were reasonably close to me who ended up prone in nursing homes, beginning to lose their sensibilities. But I can't honestly say that they were paramount in my mind when I did this. Again, in somewhat of an extended trope, this was, boy, you save yourself a lot of aggravation if you don't have to, create any action-packed novel here. Just have the guy lie there and think about things that he's already experienced. That's it. Yeah. So I was probably just being lazy, but
No, it makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
So throughout reading Eyes Open, I got a lot of Jack Kerouac vibes, and I love Jack, despite having to look up how to spell his name.
Yeah.
Like literally every time I forget how to spell the last name every single time because it's just that weird OUA thing. But I also love his writing because it's very raw and clearly written, how people speak in the real world. It's very colloquial. And this book reminded me of that. Were you influenced by him? Were you influenced by other writers? Especially in regards to the style with the 1-sentence paragraphs. That was really cool. I like that. I don't think I've ever seen that before. So I like that. Yeah. What's your answer to that?
Yeah, I ended up having a British editor on this, which was very interesting about punctuation. They kind of reversed the double, quotation marks and single. And some of this stuff, which is pure, it's more poetic, without being great poetry than it is pure literature. The idea of having single word sentences and things. Again, they're sort of literary devices to simply, do emphasis rather than italicizing everything to make a person stop. In subsequent writings, I actually get even far crazier with that, almost kind of E.E. Cummings kind of, okay, you put pauses in, you do this, you create a rhythm to the writing, you create kind of a mood around it as to how you bunch words in. In terms of influences, Kerouac, if you ever want to see a difference in how a writer has progressed, read The Town and the City, which I believe he published in 1951, and of course On the Road, which came out in 57 or something like that.
Yeah,
and
I read On the Road.
You'll see a massive difference in how this guy decided to approach writing, to end up with something that actually worked. No, I would never really say that I was influenced by Kerouac, except that I do love a lot of his writing. But then I love a lot of Hemingway and a lot of Fitzgerald, a lot of guys that I could never approach in terms of vocabulary. And Kerouac had a great vocabulary. Besides being bilingual, he actually, really knew a lot more words than I do. The Hemingway stuff was sort of the short, kind of abbreviated, kind of clean sort of a narrative. But probably like Vonnegut, like I loved Vonnegut, and
that's true.
A wonderful, playful guy with language and setup and repeat phrasings and emphasis and great stories drawn from real life many times to be able to tell. But yeah, those guys did influence me much more than any kind of modern writers who I confess I haven't read much of. Post law school, I was so turned off by reading that it took me years to get back into the pleasure of actually reading novels again. I just hated words. For a writer,
I think relate to that.
I think law school does that to be honest.
Yeah.
For this next question, I want to talk about the humor in this book. or lack thereof, according to Marina.
Oh my
Um,
God.
so, so I actually had an argument recently with a family member about Leo Tolstoy's. I know. I'll send you
He
some
wanted to
nice.
put that in. He makes it sound like I was
Yeah.
thinking it was the saddest book I've ever read. That's not what I'm trying to say.
Fine. It's fine. It's all fine, guys. Believe me. The fact you read it is just, thank you.
Right. Well, that's the beauty of a book club is you have like these different perspectives, and we can't wait to see what like people further the other clubbers, the million people that are in our book club are going to think about it. So, I had an argument recently with a family member about Leo Tolstoy's Death of Ivan Ilyich, which I thought was very funny because it was so dark. However, a lot of people don't think it's funny, especially older Russian people. I want to read an excerpt from chapter 9 when the nurses are taking care of John and they're inspecting John's erections in a comatose state.
Okay.
And I just want to point it out. So here we go. What do you think? Asks a female nurse. Not bad looking. No NICU babe, though. Do you think we should further stimulate him just to see what happens? Please say yes. I mentally signed experimental medical consent and release forms. Then the next paragraph goes, I don't know, says the lead doctor in charge of making awful decisions. He shakes his head. I don't think so. We don't know what would happen, how it would affect him. So did you mean for this part to be funny? What was your process to make things funny? What is funny to you?
Well, that was funny to me.
Yeah,
I mean, and again, it may just simply be funnier to guys who would imagine themselves, you got nothing else going on. You got an erection. You have this good-looking nurse who's somebody is suggesting, why don't we just whack this guy off and see what the hell happens? And he's like, that's a great idea. And they decide that they're not going to do it, which is, highly disappointing to him. But again, he knows he's there, sort of, and they don't know he's there. So you have this conservative sort of medical decision being made because they're worried. Why exactly, by the way, they would be worried? You can begin questioning some of the medical stuff that I'm hinting at throughout this entire thing. What the hell do they care? They really want him dead anyway, dead and out of there. But yeah, I thought, yeah, that's kind of a boy thing, is you get an erection and you have an opportunity for a free, orgasm, and they decide that they're not going to go ahead, and he's having few enough erections as it is. So yeah, but it was, I never pondered over much as to whether or not that would be funny or insulting, or whether or not it was going to be a male or female kind of a thing. I didn't.
Got it. And like looking back, or like since you just read through it, like what percentage funny were you going for? Were you going for like 75%, 50%?
If I had to describe the kind of humor, there weren't going to be a lot of laugh out loud funnies in here. There were going to be a lot of like kind of a chuckling your way through, and it was sort of important to do this. Otherwise, it was going to be A, boring, and B, it was going to be tedious. Like if you can't keep them laughing at certain points throughout the whole thing, I have enough self-awareness to know that the writing itself was not going to be, I can't wait to get to the next sentence, unless maybe there was a smile on the face to see, all right, when is the next smile going to come?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Marina, as a person that didn't find it funny, do you have any questions?
I mean, I like the comment about sort of like male and female perspective, like that joke specifically, where it's, or I guess maybe it's not necessarily designed as a joke, but sort of a comedic reflection that I think different sets of populations would just have a different knowledge base, that's where it comes from.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's probably fair. I certainly paid no attention to how this writing was going to be, and even less, by the way, in what I'm writing now. Part of this is, by the way, the older you get, the less you care. about, but sort of the more it's for the population you're writing for. And I'm not sure that that my kids would necessarily find this particularly funny for a whole host of reasons. But it may in fact be a little bit of a generational thing, or it may very well be a gender thing. But I would think that if you're being honest to yourself in your writing, that you're just writing who you are, and it's either good or bad depending on what people do or do not think about you. Yeah, like the other incidents in there are significantly negative enough for the main character that kind of a thing, that, oh yeah, man, women, but younger women particularly, might not find that as amusing as a bunch of old geezers. So yeah, that's likely going to happen. But that doesn't mean you shouldn't still put it down, you know?
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. There
Um,
should be like an age warning on this novel, you know, like do not read, you know, if you're under the age, or do not read if you're female, maybe under the age of this kind of thing, because only because you probably won't find it, you know, particularly entertaining. I don't know. Or the humor may not hit you.
Interesting. Got it. Okay.
Well, I definitely don't think I represent obviously the female sex. So I think that this book does apply, or I think this book would work for men and women. It was certainly, if anything that it wasn't, it was definitely not offensive in any way. So I feel like
Good.
that at the very least applies to a much
It's
broader
very
audience.
politically correct, Bob.
What? Politically
Well,
correct, yeah.
well, I just hope it wasn't sexist, you know, insofar as I hope I'm not sexist, you know, or overtly or knowingly, or, you know, having thought about the thing maybe for half a secondly, you know, that kind of thing.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Also, probably
Next.
not a great idea to go ahead and try to, you know, intentionally dissuade 50% of your possible, you know, reading public from reading something by, you know, being a true a-hole about it. But what?
Yeah, no, I definitely don't think that you gave that vibe at all. So
Good.
I think you're safe. What were some challenges that you faced when you were writing the story?
The story itself wasn't so much of a challenge, because frankly, there isn't much story. You know, you get a guy's in an accident, he's lying on a bed. So maybe it's like, what do you choose? How do you choose? What parts of his past do you choose to remember as you're laying out this? You know, he's not despicable, but he's not a particularly heroic kind of protagonist here, right? I mean, he's just sort of a normal guy. So part of this was, okay, these are not unique experiences for people. That I kind of hope that if you were of the age, if you were in your 60s, a lot of this would be, oh yeah, I did that. Oh yeah, I was there. Oh yeah, that, you know, a lot of this would be, yeah, you drank too much, smoked too much, fooled around this, and did, you know, that they would be able to connect, and hopefully at the end, kind of see that life always gives you opportunities to, if not redeem yourself to the greater public, to maybe redeem yourself to yourself. Okay. And maybe that at the end, even, you know, even without the angel of death, I think you have a character who comes to say, all right, yeah, he fucked up a lot, but um um but if there's a heaven and hell, you know, he'll probably squeeze into the upper place, something like that. The biggest challenges you find that I have found in writing is going back through and forcing yourself to read your copy again and again and again. I don't, because of the magic of word processing, a lot of the things written, by the way, in pads or this, and then just spewed onto a computer. I just write to just get the thoughts down, and then I worried about going back and editing them later. That really requires 4 or 5 genuine edits to get to copy that you're happy with. After about your third time reading your own damn words, it's like you don't even want to read it again. Like by the time I got this back from the publisher, and I was trying, and it was like, oh, you got to proofread it and get through, you know, every word. I missed, there's at least 7 or 8 huge errata in there, including misspelling Hemingway. And I had my best friend read this as well. And that was the same problem, is eventually you glaze over. It's like, it's done. You wrote it 2 years ago. You don't even want to read it again. You like the writing part. The editing part can be a real pain in the ass. That's a problem. And yet it's a discipline. So of course it was going to be a problem with me, because it's a discipline that you have to put yourself through.
Got it.
I never thought about that, but it's absolutely right, because I think writing in itself is a satisfying process for so many people, but having to reread what you wrote, which may be fun the first time, is not fun the 10th time or the 12th time.
No, and you're right. And by the way, no longer whatever kind of, jolt you thought you were giving a reader in the first time that you wrote it, and maybe the second time that you edited it, by the time you're done 4 or 5 times reading it, you're like, I don't even know if this works anymore. Like you're so familiar with it, and you just like, I don't know. So I cannot tell anymore whether or not this is funny, for example. When you're bringing these things up, it's like, I don't know. I thought it was funny when I wrote it, but if I heard a joke 5 or 6 times in a row, I'd say pretty damn lame, and that is a problem. So you need almost a way to be committed to the original concept that you had, and then try to refine it, and then whatever happens.
Got it. So I'm going to have 3 questions kind of in a row, one at a time. What are you most proud of about the story?
That it's done. Literally, that I felt that there was, again, you get to be in your 60s, you're not really sure, what the hell is going to happen tomorrow morning, if there's going to be a tomorrow morning. So I kind of wanted to get a book out there. This was not really the book that I want to get out there. That's the one that I'm working on now. But it was kind of like, well, at least I'll have this, if something terrible happens. So I was happy that I went through it, that I learned something about the process, that I learned something about putting together a novel, and finally had the oomph to get over the final line to get it published. And that it captured maybe the things that I needed to dump out of myself. Maybe I needed to sort of just say, okay, let's go to the sewer, and let's dig around and show it all, and this is what you are, and leave people wondering, gee, was that real? Was that real? Was that exaggerated? Was that you? Was that somebody else? But anyway, personally, it's kind of done and out. And I do think that autobiographical thing is what happens with a lot of authors the first time. They're writing from what their own knowledge base is, and they probably have a tendency to just dump it up. You're writing best when you're writing about your own knowledge. But now it's out, and now I can, let's say, move to a better level of knowledge, a more subtle level of personal knowledge. Okay, that was too long.
That's what you're most proud of. That's good. And what are you still struggling with in this story?
In what story?
I guess like what are you not proud of?
What am I not proud of? Well, again, I'm not proud of misspelling Hemingway. That really, of all of the things that really bothered me, was seeing the 2 M's show up in the final copy. Now if I spend $100, they'll fix it.
It's kind of ironic though.
But well, in a way, it was kind of like, maybe that's telling me something. I should just put them all out there. Yeah, of course it's ironic. It's stupid. And it's that glazing back over. So what I struggle with right now is marketing it. It is like going through these kind of experiences, doing book fairs, emailing libraries. I got this library down in Virginia. You guys know, I got this call out of the blue. Somebody had read it, and they wanted to get 5 copies into this library down in Virginia.
That's awesome.
And they were asking me for, whether I give them a discount. I said, no, but I guarantee you, if you contact the publisher, they'll give you, I'm sure they've got a few lying around, they'll give you free. It's only been 3 months. So it's like, libraries. Yeah, I really haven't even tried to see what the deal is to get a couple of copies into a library, But again, that's the marketing stuff. I did marketing in many ways my entire careers. But now I find it to be the most annoying thing about is the promotional part of this. Yeah,
Got
because
it.
you just want to keep writing, you know.
Got it. What advice would you give to someone who's writing a similar story?
Wait until you're in your 60s so you have something to talk about, you know, something to remember.
Hmm.
Similar story. Steve, give me a break. Really? Don't do the breathing thing. I found somewhere after I actually had put this into publication that there is another book out there that is not dissimilar to it.
Oh,
But it was a person who ended up communicating by eye blinks. And it's like, I'm so stupid. I never even bothered to really go and check to see if anything had been written like this before. Maybe in part because, you know, something like what you're doing has been done before. There
for
is
sure.
nothing that novel under. But I was like, so I'm afraid to even read that book. Although there's this little part of me that
You
says, you know, you
should.
really want to go read it and just
You
see
should. What's the
how they
name of the
approach
book?
it. I don't know.
Wait, do we want to spread the name of the competitor though? I don't know.
Yeah, maybe probably. I just cannot remember. You know,
Got it.
it's another problem of aging. Yeah.
So it's I mean, I think it would be really good for almost to read and see the comparison. Like I'm like curious, so maybe other people would be curious. Okay.
I'm frightened to hell. I'm afraid I'm going to look at it and somebody's going to say, "Oh, you ripped this off." No, sweetheart, I really didn't. It's not
Yeah, no.
subliminal. I didn't read it and forget it. No, I really didn't do this. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, like it's impossible not to like copy someone or to get inspired by someone. Like everything you do and everything you say is from someone else or from something
Sure.
else. There's nothing, there's no such thing as novel except for a novel. Um, but we'll do some research. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Right now, Marina's questions. Hopefully they're better than mine.
No, hey, all questions are good questions. I like this one a lot. So, how do you think the story would be different if it was told from Rachel's perspective?
Oh yeah. Well, I mean, if it was told from her perspective, we'd probably find out that she was a far more interesting character. I mean, I think I have her in there as having been a married, abused woman who turns out to be gay, basically. Um, which right there is sort of, well, there's an interesting sort of journey. She would have the ability to talk about other patients, of other experiences, and then she would be. It would be interesting to know what it was about this particular guy that made her think, "Man, I think there's something more to this guy than this lifeless, you know, form that's lying there."
Mm,
Um, and but then that would require writing from a woman's perspective,
mm,
okay, which I don't think I could pull off, quite frankly. I've certainly lived with the women a long time, but I will tell you, I would never pretend. I struggle with that now when I'm writing and I have another character who has her own voice. Is it's like, okay, well, I mean, if you stick to things, fine, but if you actually talk about emotions, you know, you think you're the right one to be able to do this beyond a very, very superficial way. I don't think so. So it might be a cool story from her perspective. It would be pretty different though. Yeah.
It would be kind of cool if the book had, or if you ever decided to do like a shifting perspective book where one chapter is one character and the other one is the other one, so they get to see
Yeah.
the sides. Um,
yeah.
so
Yeah.
another big question is what percentage of the book is autobiographical? So what percentage of the character is autobiographical?
What percentage? Wow. There are certainly, I mean, I drank a long time and barring, a couple of slips along the way since 2002, I've been clean. So the alcohol stuff is certainly true. Some of the infidelity is rather exaggerated, but there's, it's true enough, shall we say? Certainly, all of the going back and talking about parentage and family background and grandmothers and grandfathers and all of that. There's a lot of truth to that.
Mom, pop.
Yeah, exactly. Because for one thing, you know, I can't. They were really good people. My uncles were really good people. My grandparents were really good people. The family on the other side were very interesting people. I didn't have to invent very much to just kind of tell the parts of their story that I thought other people would find interesting. So I didn't have to exaggerate that. The older cousin is definitely a living, breathing human being, a ridiculously wonderful guy. He just pisses us all off that he's still around being a wonderful guy, and a very, very funny man at that. So a lot of the historical family stuff is absolutely true. Going forward, yeah, I mean, he's living with a Russian woman. Okay, well, so am I. And hopefully her character comes across as the sweetie she really is. And the other characters, his kids to a lesser extent, and his ex-wife, I think comes off as a pretty good character, as they should, because they are and were. But I won't say that, 50% of it is either complete bullshit or exaggerated to the point of being bullshit. Put it that way.
Got it. What type of research did you conduct for this book?
Oh, that's a really cool question, Steve. So, having decided to put this guy motionless and bowel voidless on a bed, I did have to look and see. Okay, is it possible? Like, is it possible for a guy to be in this situation where he can still think? He can still see. He can still breathe on his own. He can hear. But everybody thinks he's basically brain dead. And I was left with a resounding, yeah, possibly. Not exactly likely, but enough. So it took me into some of the tests that are talked about in there, because I said, all right, he's going to be in a hospital, so there's going to be a lot of medical procedures. So I investigated it enough to satisfy myself that it was not completely implausible that this could happen. And I kind of left it at that. Frankly, I still think it's a little implausible, but whatever.
Got it.
Yeah.
And who would you want to read this book most? Which group of people, like demographic or whatever?
Or a person?
Or a particular person? Like,
I think everything in there has been confessed to the people in my life that are closest to me. So it wasn't like anything in there was going to come as a big shock. No, I think I was aiming pretty much at a diverse demographic group, and I guess I would hope to find people that just were people that would read it and that would walk away saying, "Oh, okay, that wasn't a waste of 3 hours of my time," and I kind of laughed along the way. And yeah, there were a couple of things to think about. And so some of the reviews that I've gotten back struck me as rather better than I expected, saying this is not a book you can easily just go through, that it makes you think. And I was like, yeah, I don't really ever remember putting that as a thinking as I'm writing that I want you to be poring over these words and the thoughts that are presented there. But it's like, well, that's a really happy conclusion. If more of that happens, that's pretty good. Yeah. And how about this? Enough people that would be interested in saying, boy, I can't wait to read his next book. That would be a great takeaway.
makes sense.
Yeah. All right. I have a bunch more. So, Rachel, the character, was she inspired by a real person?
No, she was not. I remember I was never in a hospital, so she can't be that way. If she is, she's inspired by a more no, she was not. No.
I wrote down this passage just because I found it really interesting. So I figured I'm just going to be obnoxious and read it. So you're right. In chapter 17, I always wanted to write a story of a guy spending so much time creating an alternative world in his own head. He eventually loses himself in it. Where did that come from?
The Universal Baseball Association, Robert Coover, proprietor, an old book written back in the 60s about a guy who invents a Stratomatic kind of baseball game. And he gets lost in the players, and he begins, every one of the players he invents the rules of the game, and he begins to envision them as real, and they take over his life to the exclusion of what's really going on back around him. And it struck me that a lot of people go and revisit their own kind of daydreams or their own kind of false reality. And it seemed to make sense to have that in here, where you got a guy who's got nothing other than old memories and new stimuli that are pretty damn boring along the way. So he has to sort of create his own reality. It just seemed to make a certain amount of sense. But there actually was a book that I love reading. Used to read it like every 2 years. I would read the book just because it was a fun book to read. And so that was always in the back of my mind. The bathroom scene stuff is, yeah, that isn't like me or the character actually really does that. But it did strike me like, yeah, I can imagine all the time you sit in the bathroom looking at the damn floor, you probably begin sort of seeing things that are beginning to happen. So I just kind of worked around that.
Cool.
I feel like most of us, if not all of us, like lose ourselves in our alternative world because we all have different perspectives, different experiences. Even the people that we know, you can know the same person but have very different feelings about that person. So I think we're all lost in it unless you go for like a 2-week retreat to not talk for 2 weeks. Maybe that could reset you or something. But without that, you kind of like, it's hard to not get lost in your reality or reality.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I'm wearing scrubs here. So this question has to do with medicine. The book seems to be a great book to read for medical students and anybody in health and anybody in healthcare. And in my opinion, it's actually much better than any or a lot of nonfiction manuals in terms of a kind of not only how to run a hospital, but like what actually happens. Like you can read an entire medical book on like cancer and never really get the quality of what it is to be a cancer patient because all it is talking about are like different drugs and whatever. The following quote is a great example of the legality of healthcare and how it motivates people in strange ways. It's chapter 11, page 40. I was shocked old Doc Kelly answered as many as he did, the whole thing sounding deposition-like. Later came more formal inquiries made on letterhead in very stiff, very cold language, cold as the hospital, cold as blood running through litigation attorneys. Those guys can make a case out of anything, so I was surprised there was no suit. My family for forging it so long as the medical bills got paid. The lawyer was major league pissed off, but even more major league pissed off at me because while the accident and stroke lined up nicely together, the seizure did not. The seizure screwed up the case. There were many snippets in the book like this, including things nurses and doctors did in private in a hospital. What lessons do you think healthcare professionals and executives would take away from reading this book?
Lessons. The point of all of that was essentially to say two things. One, they're just people. And so I remember there were at least one occasion where the character is thinking, you deal with this environment, and pretty soon every environment, doesn't matter whether or not you're working at an insurance company, a plumbing company, or in a hospital, it becomes the norm. Everything becomes the norm. And you and your associates, you got to find humor in a day to get through the day. You just have to do it no matter what damn job you happen to be in. Even if it's one where there's a whole bunch of sick people and it smells kind of funny in there, you need a way to relate to people and enjoy your 8 to 9 hours, or in the medical profession, even more while you're there, or you're going to go crazy. So it wasn't like I had, personal experience with any of these things. The insurance stuff I kind of did because I worked for an insurance company as a lawyer, and I knew how, cheap we are on things, and how so often cases come down to you forget about the patient in there, and you're just talking about out of whose pocket are things going to be paid. And so that which is hardly a unique or profound message coming out, which is, yeah, it all comes down in many ways to money at some level above the actual caretakers there. I'm not sure that it's a fair representation of what goes on in a hospital. I really don't know. I didn't read any books about a real, a day in the life of, of Joe Doctor or Josephine Nurse. But it struck me that, yeah, I don't think anything I'm talking about in here doesn't happen. It's got to. We're just people.
Okay. Yeah. So like almost like if there was a lesson, maybe like a humanization.
Yeah.
Like
Sure.
yeah, which is like very difficult given financial incentives in the whole system.
Sure. Yeah.
Got it. All right. Makes sense. That's a good answer. Mariela?
To add to that, I think it's not easy being a medical professional as a nurse or a doctor in a hospital. There's just so much that happens.
Mm.
It's, yeah,
Yeah.
tough job.
That's
right.
why I never went there. It was like, okay, yeah, my parents sort of had professional aspirations for me because of how we had progressed. My dad being the first one to go to college, and I was like, man, I could never be a doctor. I could never be a nurse. I could never have in my hands, or my abilities keeping a person alive or dead. Now I can bankrupt them. I can be a lawyer and do a really crappy job, but they're probably not going to die as a result of that. Now I have enormous respect, even though it sounds like I make fun of them there. I have enormous respect for those people. I really do.
I'm 100% with you on that one. I feel exactly the same way. Yeah. Couldn't do it. I couldn't do it. My parents wanted the same thing. I just couldn't do it.
Yeah.
But
Don't
back to the
recommend it.
book.
I don't recommend it. It's
Yeah.
there's a reason why I got out of it and why I'm doing stuff like this. It's it feels like you're playing a losing battle. It feels like all you're doing is not helping people. You're just part of this like system that's like generating money, and none of it is made to like actually help people. Which, if you're selling like phones and computers is fine, but when you're selling health, it's not fine.
Yeah.
Can you tell us a little bit about what your next book is?
Yeah, sure. So my managing editor, when I was in the newspapers, came to me one day and said she'd found this whole batch of letters inside the wall in a house that they were renovating. And it turned out to be old love letters that were written probably about 60 years before. And impossible to read, by the way. The font had to be like 1. And you had to read it with a magnifying glass. And quite frankly, the story wasn't all that fascinating. But the whole idea of running across that, kind of stuck in my head. And so I put the story with a younger couple, a childless couple up in Dalton, Massachusetts, where I did spend a couple of years and where a bunch of still friends have actually come from, and they uncovered that. So you got a guy writing about writing who's writing a play, and in the play, his protagonist is writing a book. And then, so you have those storylines, then you have the storyline of he and his actual wife, and then you have the storyline of the love affair from 100 years ago. And mixed in there are various suicides and murders, and some unknown events that happen to some of the characters in there. So the idea was essentially run the same kind of events through 4 lives and to 4 different kinds of conclusions, showing maybe a little bit about the, how unpredictable life can be, the different places it can take you. So that's what it is. But it gave
That
me an
sounds really
opportunity.
cool.
It gave me an opportunity to try to write old letters, because I had to write all of these letters. So I was ripping off old Conan Doyle, Sherlock Holmes kind of phraseology, and reading old books to say, how did people actually write like that? And the old guy is a journalist. So it gave me a chance to talk about World War I and women's suffragette and talking to Black widow veterans of World War I. So I could throw in a lot of things that I thought, I think the people reading this will find it interesting and very, very historical. But yeah, that's it.
It's a good thing that you started with the autobiographical type book first, because that sounds really complicated, almost like Inception complicated, like hard to keep track.
Yeah.
And then also the fact that it's in the past, writing in that style, that sounds really difficult.
Yeah.
I'm not sure it's going to work, but yeah. But so the autobiographical stuff, I was able to dump that with this first book. So it's not so me anymore, or me could be me could be me could be me anymore. Yeah.
Yeah, and we also had a book that was a kind of historical fiction, and it was really fun to read. So I think this could be a good book for us to read in the future once it's out. And it would be really cool to compare and contrast to Eyes Open, the style, and all that stuff. So if readers wanted to reach out to you personally regarding the book, or follow you on social media or any way, how could they do so?
Social media. Yeah, I think I have a Twitter account. The book I'm writing now, the guy gets lost in right-wing social media. You probably don't want to follow that. But yeah, you can pass along my email address. I don't care. That's fine. You know, always happy to respond. You can put my phone number in. It doesn't ring that often anymore, you know, except for, you know, warranty companies. So, right.
And and Medicare eligibility stuff.
Five of those a day. Does it ever end?
No.
I mean, it's in June you're getting them. It's like, wait a minute. Is that for the old one? Is it for the new one? Or, you know what? Geez.
I think that's why a lot of people are happy about dying, because those calls end.
Yeah. No, but okay. Thanks, guys.
Whatchamacallit? Well, it was a pleasure talking to you. It was a pleasure reading it.
Yeah.
As a person that actually found it funny. And I look forward to reading the next one and discussing it and hearing your thoughts about it. Marina?
Yeah, thank you so much for taking the time, like an hour, to just
Really?
humor us, I guess.
Really taking the time. I'm effing retired. You know, I mean, this was an absolute pleasure. And thank you guys very much. Appreciate it.
Oh, thank you.
We were aiming, by the way, for an hour, and we're pretty much right there.
Yeah,
So
we hit it.
we thought we were going to go up to 2 hours because of the number of questions. And I think we expected like very long-winded responses, but your responses were very like succinct. Hemingway with 2 M's would be proud.
Yeah, they weren't, but that's okay. You know, whatever. You know, I know you spin bullshit all of the time. But anyway, I appreciate it. In an hour, it was perfectly great. And have a wonderful day. Okay?
Yes.
Thank you. We'll
Thank
see you
you.
next book.
You got it. Bye-bye.
Peace.